Hello, my name's Tom, and I wanted to basically run you through using subsurface scattering inside of Cinema 4D for, characters and stuff like that, or whatever it might be. Some of the issues that I ran into and stuff like that, and I couldn't really find a whole lot of resources for it, so I figured I'd do a short video for you guys or anybody else that's having problems with it. So this is my sculpt over in ZBrush. Nothing too crazy detailed. I did have some HD geometry that I just put some pores on and stuff like that. Baked all my maps out to a layered PSD, but you can see that the maps aren't, all that detailed. Not the greatest, but what I wanted to do was subsurface scattering. So you can see here that this is the render I got, and aside from the maps being a little not the greatest, the subsurface scattering is pretty much what I was looking for, or what I was trying to do. It might even be a little bit strong here, but I wanted to run you through basically getting this effect quickly instead of playing with a bunch of dials and not really making any headway or anything like that. So let's close this out and let's clear the material off our model here, and let's start from scratch. So new material. And the first thing I'm going to do is I actually want to add a displacement map. So checkbox over here activates displacement. If you don't know Cinema 4D, there you go. And let's plug in our head material. And we're going to want subpolygon displacement. 4 is a little bit overkill for our displacement for what we need. We don't really have any details in our displacement. It's basically just to hold the edges when it subdivides. So I'm going to do 2, which is pretty much the equivalent of throwing a subdivision modifier on there. And let's do round geometry and map resulting geometry. 1.9 inches is way too high, so let's do 0.1. And let's do a quick render, viewport render, to see if it's holding. And it is. So it's basically holding the shape. So there's our low res model. And this is what it's supposed to look like. So it's pretty close. Oh, let's go into solo mode. There we go. So it's pretty close. It's got no detail, but it's holding the shapes that I want it to hold. All right, so we can cancel that out. Now next, this is one of the nice things about Cinema 4D, is I'm going to click that, and we have a couple options here. One is to get into the habit of making sure this is linear. Now we're only going to have to do this once, which is nice. So let's go back, and on the texture, there's an arrow here. If we click copy channel, now we can go over to the normal, activate it, and then in the arrow again, let's do paste channel. Now the only problem is we don't want the displacement map there, but we have a layered PSD, so we can go to our layer set and choose normal. And you can see it's already set to linear. So let's go back up, and our normal map is still a little funky. So let's flip the Y because it came from ZBrush. And there we go. Now our normal map is, well, to me anyway, I'm just used to expecting what it looks like. If you can't really tell, let me turn the wireframe off here. And what you're going to want to do is go to the editor, and texture preview size by default is really low. So let's do 1024. So now we're getting a little bit of a better preview of what our textures are looking like on our model. So now we got our normal plugged in, so let's go up to color and paste channel again, and let's choose for our layer set background, which is our color layer. There we go. So now we got color, displacement, and normal. So if we render this, let's have a look. Cool. So now we're not getting any subsurface happening yet because we haven't put it on yet. So the other thing I wanted to do is change the model under the color. It says model, it says Lambertian. I don't want Lambertian, I want Oren-Nyer. I'm not really sure if I'm saying that right. And then for the roughness, I usually go about 75%. So now let's look at subsurface scattering. So for this, I'm going to turn displacement, normal, reflectance. For color, I'm not going to turn color off because I still want to see the model. But what I'm going to do is change my color up here to a darker gray. And right here you see mix mode, which is normal. And then we have mix strength, it's at 100%. That means we're going to see 100% of the texture coming through here. So I'm going to change that to 0. So now we're just getting the gray. And now under the luminance channel, I'm going to check that to activate it. And under texture, rather than loading a texture in, I'm going to go down to effects and subsurface scattering. And let's click that. So by default, the path length is 3.9 inches, which is way too far. It looked like blown out wax. Actually, let's render and have a look. Yeah, it doesn't even look like wax. It's just pure light going through the whole thing. So let's look at the settings that I generally use. First, path length is usually between 0.1 and 0.05 for me, but you know what? It really depends on the strength of your lights. It depends on how big your model is. But like I said, for me, I keep it generally real-world scale. So let's start with 0.1. Now for the color, usually choose a bit of a orangey red color, usually along the mid-value range. And for the red, I'm going to choose 200. For the green, I'm going to choose 100. I'll leave that at 100, and for the blue, I'll choose 90. So you're going to see what this does in a second. So basically, this is the color of my subsurface. My path length is how far it's traveling in, and then these are individual channels choosing. Like the red's it's basically going to go 200%. The green is going to go 100%, and the blue is going to go 90% in, and that's offset by 0.1 inches. So basically, it's going to go 0.1 inches for red, but the red is going to go further because it's at 200%. I don't know if it's really complicated the way that works. It's kind of annoying, but once you get the hang of it, you'll see. So let's go over to multiple. Fast evaluation, we want this because this is going to render faster for us. Everything else I leave the same. For single, I do activate it, but I'm going to leave it off for now. And under advanced, I use Fresnel reflectivity. I set that to 50%. And then index of refraction, I set to 1.5. So if I rendered this right now, let's see what it looks like. So this is basically kind of what it looks like, which is like a wax, which is okay because we're going to be mixing this with a texture later. Two textures actually, one for the subsurface and then one for the color, the overall color. So for the most part, it's traveling at what I would expect it to travel through, which is not bad, but it's not lighting up like around the ear like I want it to. So let's go to single. And we're going to enable single scattering, enable separate color channels, leave the phase function at 0 for now. Custom sampling I'm going to activate, and I'm going to change it to 2 because the more samples for single scatter, the longer it's going to take to render, and it'll be a big, it has a really big impact on your render time. So choosing custom sampling and setting it to 2 when you can is good. So let's try another render. So now you're starting to see through the ear how single channel has actually changed it, and you can see a little bit of you can see the refraction that's actually going on, which is kind of what I wanted, which I wasn't getting without single scatter being on. So now that we basically have kind of what I'm looking for, this is pretty much it. I mean, you could play around with the phase function a little bit. For instance, let's change it to -0.25. And let's do another quick render, and you should have a little bit of a change. Actually, -0.25 looks pretty good. So what I'm looking at is a transition with the ear. How it's nice and dark in here, and you're actually seeing some definition going on as opposed to basically just a smooth gradient going through it all like it was before without single on. Okay, so I'm going to cancel this, and let's now go back to our luminance channel, subsurface scattering, and under a shader, basically I'm going to paste the channel in again, and I'm going to choose the color again, and what that's going to do is our color up here now is going to mix with our texture over here, which is going to help. So now it's basically a color and a texture map actually mixing together for the subsurface. So now we're getting more color, or basically we're mixing the color in of our texture map with it. No other explanation for it. So now you can see everything's a little bit more saturated. So let's go now and reactivate our color map by dragging our mix strength. Oh, that was loud. Grabbing our mix strength and bringing it all the way back up. And let's give this a render and see how it looks. So that really desaturated it again. So it's basically it's like a push and pull thing. But together, once they're built up, it starts to look good over. And once you've done this enough times, you're going to see that like it actually starts to make sense and it actually starts to work, rather than plugging one in and not getting the results you want and just going back and forth on subsurface scattering and tweaking different distances and stuff. Get everything plugged in first and then toggle everything on slowly. So right now I can turn my displacement and normal back on, and it's still not going to give me exactly what I'm looking for, but we're getting close. So my normal and displacement are basically just for, you know, my detail, but there are still some things that are wrong with this right now. Well, obviously we don't have our reflectance channel on, which is our reflections and specular values and stuff like that. But right now, her eyebrows, her eyes, and her lips still don't look the way we want them to look. And the final key, or the final thing for me that was figuring out how to get it to look good, was I was making different maps and trying to overlay them on, when the easiest way to do it was to just activate diffusion, and there's a checkbox up here called Effect Luminance. So if you check that on, I'm going to leave Effect Specular on, and then let's paste our channel in again, and let's choose again our background, which is our color. And now you're going to see a big difference. Oh, I don't want to render to there. I just want a viewport render. There we go. There we go. So now you're seeing a huge difference. So mainly around the eyes, the eyebrows, the lips, even inside the nose a little bit. So what we're getting now is we're getting our subsurface scattering. We're getting a color from our subsurface scattering, which is an overall color, but we're also blending that color with a texture map. And then that is also getting blended with the color map. So all in all, over in Mental Ray, you basically get this big long shader, and you choose your epidermal and your subdermal, and your backscatter layer, and you got 3-4 parameters for each one of those. This is basically doing the same thing, only you're doing it in, you know, the 3 different channels that I'm using, which is color, subsurface scattering, and diffusion, and then they all mix in. You basically just choose how far you want the subsurface scattering to go, and a path length of red, blue, and green, which is really nice, and it seems really complicated, and it is at first, but once you get that down or understand how those path lengths work, it's really easy. And it's way faster to render subsurface scattering in Cinema 4D than it is in, you know, V-Ray or Mental Ray. Modo is pretty quick, but this is still faster. But so there it is. I mean, that's basically subsurface scattering. It's pretty easy once you get it down. And I'll run you through really quickly again. Color, for the basic color. Diffusion basically cancels out areas where you don't want to have as much SSS, like the eyebrows and stuff, and I'm driving that by actually the same map as I'm using for my color. Luminance channel, click the arrow, subsurface scattering, go in here. My path length is set to 0.1 inches, red 200, green 100, blue 90, and I have like a orangey saturated, orangey red color, which is being mixed by my color, my skin color again. And then for multiple, fast evaluation is on just for speed. Single scattering is enabled. My phase function is at -0.25. Custom sampling is at 2 for speed again. And under advanced, Fresnel reflectivity is at 50%, and my index of refractions is at 1.5. That's pretty much it. If you wanted something like more advanced, like say if you're just really not liking the way it is, you can go into lights and you can actually exclude certain lights. So if you wanted only the subsurface to be affecting this rim light back here, you could exclude the two other lights just by clicking this area and adding the two lights here. So now those are both excluded. They won't contribute any subsurface scattering. If you wanted to get even more into it, there is one more thing that can be done. I don't know why this is lit up like that. Hope I didn't hit anything. No. Weird. I'm not sure what just happened. I might have hit something really quickly. Oh, there it goes. So one other thing that's cool is actually, I'll demonstrate that right now. I'm going to add a sky object, which is kind of like an environment. I'm going to create a texture or a material, drag and drop it. And I'm going to turn everything off except for luminance. And I'm going to put a gradient in there. And I want the gradient to go top to bottom. And I want it to be a little bit green, something like that. And the reason for this is because subsurface scattering is also affected by global illumination. So now I have 3 lights, and for my environment, I just put a gradient of black to like a light green in the luminance channel. And down in the illumination tab, it generates GI and it receives GI, but I want it also to be a GI area light. So now I'm going to turn down my key light a little bit, just to make it a little bit more prominent. So at 1500, I'm going to do 1000, and my fill light, I'm actually just going to turn right off, and my backlight I'll leave the way it is. And let's go to Effects, Global Illumination. I'm going to change this to low, and this to also low. Actually, I'm going to change this to preview. There we go. Just because it doesn't really need to be that accurate for this. All we want is just the ambient light. And let's render this, and you'll see that the subsurface scattering is even mostly, actually I haven't done it with just a gradient like this. Usually I use HDRI, but for the most part it usually gives you even more realistic results. So there you go. So you're actually seeing what'll happen is that you're basically hitting the model with like an extra ambient color lighting too, and it just gives it more of a realistic look. Let me turn on reflectance again, and let's change this to a GGX. Roughness is at 50. Let's do 38 or something. Reflection strength, let's do 50%. Specular up. Fresneling, let's do dielectric. Let's do, I don't know. Oops, I hit conductor. Dielectric, and let's do asphalt or something. Alright. Actually, I'm going to turn my reflection down just a little bit more. Let's try render. Ooh, one more thing I want to do before I render that. Under the illumination tab again, under strength and saturation, so strength is the amount of light that comes out of the HDRI, and saturation is the amount of saturation that it comes out. So if you want it to be really green, because I got a little bit of green on my map, you can pump up the saturation from 100 to 200 to 1000 or whatever. Just to show, I'm going to do 300, and that's going to brighten it up a lot. And then let's give it a render. There you go, really blown out. But the subsurface scattering is still working. Not seeing the backlight on the ears anymore. So this is another thing that's the other reason I wanted to show this is not just because it works really well with global illumination, but whenever I was creating subsurface scattering before, it was always it looked good at this angle and it looked good with these lights, but then you move to a different scene with different lights and it looks terrible and you have to tweak it for each one. And I didn't really like that. It just seems really inefficient and just not right, which is also why I like working in real world scale. So basically I had like super full blasted light from everywhere. I had a normal light scene. Now I just switched it to a little bit of a darker scene, and the subsurface scattering is still working for the most part the way it's supposed to. I didn't spend a whole lot of time tweaking it, but you can already see that, with no key light on, or sorry, no fill light on and a lowered key light, you're still getting that really nice backlit look, and it looks, for the most part what it's supposed to look like, and it's not real blown out when the lights are down, and it's not, super waxy looking when it's got a full blast of light. And that's what I was looking for. So there it is, skin material inside of Cinema 4D. I mean, this isn't bad. I'm on a late 2014 iMac, and I think the screen resolution right now is 4K. Well, it's a 5K monitor, but I think by default it's at 4K. And doing a viewport render this big means that it's a decent resolution render. And I'm at 1 minute and 30 seconds. I'll let it go to a 2 pass, and we'll see how long that takes. Just to show you that the speed is very, very good inside of Cinema 4D. 3 area lights. I don't know, 5 or 6 maps that are plugged in, but it's really the same PSD file that's being plugged in. I'm sure that has some kind of impact in performance, positively, not negatively. There we go, pass 2 at under 2 minutes. I'm not sure what this resolution is. I'm assuming it's something like 2500 by whatever viewport resolution, but still very fast considering, V-Ray and Mental Ray. I could probably get the same quality, but it'd take me 3-4 minutes usually to get a preview render out. But there you go, Cinema 4D skin. I hope this helps. I was looking for something like this a while back.